200,000 trucks gone, not grounded, not rerouted by government order, not redirected by some new trade policy signed in Ottawa or Washington, just gone quietly, systematically, one logistics decision at a time from a bridge that held undisputed dominance over North American commercial trade for decades. In 2025, the Blue Water Bridge in Sarnia, Ontario, recorded 2.1 million commercial truck crossings. The Ambassador Bridge in Windsor logged 1.9 million. That is a gap of 200,000 trucks in a single year. And in the first quarter of 2026, the trend did not slow down. It accelerated. 531,732 crossings at Blue Water, 496,796 at Ambassador. Month by month, without interruption, the reversal held. I want you to understand what that number actually means. The Ambassador Bridge did not lose market share because of a new law. It did not lose it because of a scandal, a structural failure, or a political deal made behind closed doors. It lost it because of $100. $100 per crossing on a standard 5-axle semi-tar. That is the toll difference between crossing at Windsor and crossing at Sarnia. At the scale of a national fleet running hundreds of crossings per week, that gap does not just add up. It rewires the entire logistics network permanently. But here is what makes this story far more consequential than a simple toll comparison. There is a third bridge. It is not open yet. It has already been delayed twice. It sits at the center of a geopolitical dispute between two of the largest trading partners on Earth. And its toll structure, its ownership model, and its physical design are about to force every fleet operator, every supply chain executive, and every trade policy architect in North America to make a decision that will define this corridor for the next generation. 3 bridges, 1 corridor, 3.6 $66 billion crossing the Canada-United States border every single day. Which one wins? Let me be precise about what we are actually looking at here. 3 crossings, 3 completely different ownership structures, 3 completely different cost profiles, and 3 completely different visions of what commercial infrastructure is supposed to do in the 21st century. To understand which bridge wins this corridor, you first have to understand exactly who each of these players is and what they are actually fighting for. Start with the Ambassador Bridge. The Ambassador Bridge is privately owned. It has been controlled by the Morround family for decades. That single fact explains almost everything about how it operates and why it is losing. A privately owned crossing has one primary obligation: return on capital, not logistics efficiency, not national supply chain resilience, not competitive toll pricing, return on capital. And for decades, that model worked because the Ambassador Bridge had no serious competition. It connected Windsor, Ontario, directly to Detroit, Michigan. It sat at the geographic heart of the most industrially dense bilateral corridor in North America. The automotive supply chain running between Canadian assembly operations and American factories depended on it almost entirely. When you are the only serious option, you do not need to be the best option. You just need to exist. That era is over. Now look at the Blue Water Bridge in Sarnia. The Blue Water Bridge is publicly owned and operated by the Federal Bridge Corporation Limited, a Canadian Crown corporation. Its toll structure reflects that $7 per axle on a standard 5-axle semi-truck compared to $27 per axle at the Ambassador on a single crossing. That is a $100 difference. Multiply that across a fleet running 300 crossings per week, and you are looking at $30,000 in weekly savings per fleet. That number does not negotiate. It does not care about brand loyalty or geographic convenience. It simply redirects traffic. And in 2025, it redirected 200,000 trucks. The Blue Water Bridge also connects directly to Highway 42 in Ontario and to Interstate 69 and Interstate 94 in Michigan. Freeway to freeway, no urban surface streets, no Windsor City traffic, no Detroit road network congestion on the American side. For a carrier optimizing both cost and delivery time simultaneously, Sarnia offers a dual advantage that Windsor simply cannot match under its current structure. But neither of these bridges is the most important player in this story. That distinction belongs to the Gordie Howe International Bridge. The Gordie Howe Bridge is not open as of April 2026. It still does not have a confirmed opening date. It has been delayed twice, and yet it has already fundamentally altered the competitive dynamics of this entire corridor, because its pricing, its design, and its ownership model represents something neither the Ambassador nor the Blue Water Bridge can claim. Canada financed the Gordie Howe Bridge almost entirely on its own. The total cost reached approximately 6.4 billion, covering the bridge span, customs infrastructure, and highway connections on both sides of the border. Under a 2012 agreement negotiated with Michigan, the state contributed no upfront construction funding. In exchange, Michigan secured joint ownership of the completed asset and will receive 50% of net toll revenue once Canada recovers its costs. The announced commercial toll rate for the discount program is $6.90 per axle. The Ambassador Bridge charges $15 per axle for its equivalent discount program on a standard 5-axle semi-truck. That is a $40.50 cost advantage on every single crossing at the Gordie Howe Bridge compared to the Ambassador. The Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority did not price that crossing by accident. They priced it to win. This is not a bridge. This is a market entry strategy backed by $6.4 billion of public capital designed from the ground up to capture commercial volume that the Ambassador Bridge spent decades accumulating. 3 players, 3 fundamentally different positions, and only one corridor to divide between them. The math is already running. The question is who it runs in favor of, and why the answer is far more complicated than the toll rates alone suggest. Here is what nobody in this conversation is saying out loud. The Blue Water Bridge did not win because it is better. It won because the Ambassador Bridge became unaffordable at exactly the wrong moment in history. And that distinction matters enormously because it tells you something critical about how permanent this shift actually is and where the volume goes next. Think about the timing. 2025 was not a normal year for the Southern Ontario manufacturing belt. The trade war between Canada and the United States had been running for over a year, generating sustained disruption across every major industry in the region. Automotive tariffs pushed Windsor and Sarnia's combined unemployment rate to 10%. 50% metals tariffs compressed margins for steel and aluminum producers throughout the corridor. The businesses still operating were absorbing tariff-driven input cost increases across every single line item simultaneously: raw materials, energy, labor, cross-border logistics. In that environment, a $100 toll premium per crossing did not just look expensive, it looked indefensible. Fleet operators running compressed margins do not absorb avoidable costs, they eliminate them. And the Ambassador Bridge's toll premium, which the industry had always known about and historically tolerated because of geographic convenience, suddenly crossed a threshold. The convenience was no longer worth the price. Carriers began rerouting north to Sarnia, not as an experiment, but as a permanent operational restructuring. Once a fleet rebuilds its route architecture around a new crossing, the switching costs to reverse that decision are significant. Dispatching systems, driver schedules, fuel calculations, delivery windows, all of it recalibrates around the new route. The Ambassador Bridge is not getting that volume back simply by waiting for tariff pressures to ease. But here is the consequence that almost nobody is talking about. Blue Water's dominance is transitional. The Ontario Trucking Association has stated it directly. Once the Gordie Howe Bridge opens, fleets currently crossing at Sarnia will face an entirely new decision. The Gordie Howe crosses at Windsor, closer to the automotive manufacturing core, connected to modern freeway infrastructure, and priced at $6.90 per axle under its discount program. That is a meaningful cost advantage over Blue Water's $7 per axle, compounded by significantly shorter transit distances for carriers serving the Windsor-Detroit industrial zone. What 2025 actually established is this: commercial carriers are not loyal to geography, they are loyal to economics. They drove an additional hour of highway to save $20 per axle at Sarnia. They will absolutely reconsider that extra hour when a competitively priced, purpose-built modern crossing opens 30 minutes closer to their actual delivery destinations. The Ambassador Bridge is therefore facing something far worse than losing volume to one competitor. It is facing the possibility of being compressed from both directions simultaneously. Blue Water pulling from the north, Gordie Howe closing in from the south, while its own structural disadvantages remain completely unchanged. Highest tolls in the region, oldest infrastructure, urban approach roads on both sides. The market did not just shift once. It is preparing to shift again, and the Ambassador Bridge's private ownership model gives it almost no structural ability to respond quickly enough to stop it. Now, I need you to pay close attention because this is where the story stops being about toll rates and starts being about something much larger. In February 2026, Donald Trump threatened to block the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge. His stated argument was straightforward: Canada owned both sides of the crossing. The United States had been strategically disadvantaged by the financing arrangement, and American interests deserved compensation before the first commercial truck ever crossed. That framing collapsed within hours, not because of Canadian outrage, not because of diplomatic theatrics, but because the documented legal reality of this project made the claim factually unsustainable. And the people who knew that best were not in Ottawa. They were in Michigan. Let me translate what actually happened here. The ownership structure of the Gordie Howe Bridge is not ambiguous. It is not a matter of interpretation. It was negotiated publicly in 2012, signed by Michigan's Republican Governor Rick Snyder, reviewed through federal permitting channels, and codified in bilateral agreements that have been on the public record for over a decade. Canada financed construction. Michigan contributed zero upfront capital. In exchange, Michigan secured joint ownership of the completed asset and will receive 50% of net toll revenue once Canada recovers its $6.4 billion investment. Read that again. Michigan paid nothing to build it. Michigan owns half of it. Michigan collects half the revenue from it indefinitely. In 2013, the United States State Department issued the presidential permit required for construction to proceed. In 2017, Trump himself stood alongside Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and called the Gordie Howe Bridge a vital economic link between two nations. In 2019, he signed legislation allocating United States customs funding directly tied to the project. So when February 2026 arrived, and the claim emerged that America had been disadvantaged by this arrangement, the question I kept returning to was a simple one. If this deal was unfair to the United States, why did the United States approve it, permit it, fund it, and publicly celebrate it across two separate administrations, including Trump's own first term? The answer is that the deal was never the issue. The geopolitical atmosphere surrounding it had changed, and that change is what you need to understand if you want to read this situation clearly. Canada had spent the previous year sending unmistakable signals. Provincial retaliatory measures had placed targeted restrictions on certain American goods. More significantly, Canada had begun actively diversifying its trade relationships, pursuing agreements and partnerships that indicated it was no longer positioning itself as exclusively dependent on United States market access. From Washington's perspective, that external engagement carried a specific risk. It threatened to dilute American economic leverage inside North America's integrated supply system. In that context, the Gordie Howe Bridge stopped being a piece of cooperative infrastructure and became something else entirely. It became a strategic node, a physical asset sitting at the precise intersection of trade flow, manufacturing output, logistics capacity, and bilateral political leverage. A $6.44 billion symbol of Canadian infrastructural independence built at the most critical commercial crossing on the continent. Threatening to block its opening was not really about the bridge. It was about sending a signal in the opposite direction. When you control access to infrastructure that moves 8,000 trucks per day through one of the most integrated manufacturing corridors on Earth, you hold downstream pressure over industries that depend on uninterrupted movement. The bridge became a visible instrument, a way to signal broader grievances without imposing formal trade sanctions that would trigger immediate and legally defined retaliation mechanisms. Canada's response, and I want to be precise about this, was a masterclass in strategic restraint. Prime Minister Mark Carney did not schedule a press conference. He did not issue a retaliatory statement. He called Trump directly. In that conversation, he laid out 4 factual pillars without emotional escalation. Canada financed the project. Ownership is shared under the 2012 agreement. Workers and materials came from both nations, and the bridge serves the economic interests of both countries. He then stated he looked forward to its opening. No rhetorical fire, no retaliatory threats, just documented facts delivered with calm confidence. The contrast in approach was deliberate and effective. Washington applied political heat. Ottawa responded with legal precision, and Michigan bipartisan economically motivated Michigan publicly backed the Canadian position because blocking the bridge would damage Michigan's economy more directly and more immediately than it would damage Canada's. That is the deeper mechanics of this dispute. Infrastructure tied to supply chains does not just move goods, it concentrates leverage. And when political actors attempt to weaponize that leverage, the documented legal architecture underneath the infrastructure either holds or it does not. In this case, it held completely. Let me bring this down from the level of bilateral agreements and presidential permits and place it exactly where it belongs, on the factory floor, in the dispatch office, at the kitchen table. Because the decisions being made at the infrastructural and geopolitical level of this story are not abstract, they translate directly into production schedules, employment figures, operating margins, and the price of goods that move from a Canadian assembly plant to an American consumer without either of them ever knowing which bridge carried it there. Start with the macro picture. The Detroit-Windsor corridor is not simply a busy trade route, it is one of the most densely integrated manufacturing zones on the planet. Automotive components, industrial machinery, agricultural goods, and energy-linked materials move through this corridor in synchronized cycles built around just-in-time production models. A just-in-time system has zero tolerance for unpredictable delay. When a part shipment is 30 minutes late, it does not sit in a waiting room. It stalls an assembly line, and a stalled assembly line does not pause gracefully. It generates cascading cost consequences across every downstream process connected to it. Nearly 25% of all merchandise trade between Canada and the United States moves through this region. 25%. That is not a regional figure. That is a continental one. When the physical architecture of this corridor shifts, when the primary crossing changes, when transit times compress or expand, when toll structures alter fleet economics at scale, the reverberations travel through supply chains that most people never think about until the product they ordered is delayed or the price of the vehicle they are buying increases by an amount nobody can easily explain. The Gordie Howe Bridge, once operational, is projected to facilitate approximately 8,000 commercial truck crossings per day. Studies estimate it will reduce transit times by up to 20 minutes per trip compared to current Ambassador Bridge routing. Over the course of a decade, that compression translates into billions of dollars in recovered logistics efficiency across the automotive sector alone. Now, bring it to the micro level. Windsor and Sarnia are sitting at 10% unemployment right now. That number is not a background statistic. It represents real households absorbing the compounded pressure of automotive tariffs, metals cost increases, and a regional manufacturing base that has been operating under sustained economic stress for over a year. For the fleet operators still running in that environment, the $100 toll difference per crossing at Sarnia versus Windsor is not a preference. It is a survival calculation. $30,000 per week in toll savings for a mid-size fleet is the difference between maintaining headcount and making cuts. When the Gordie Howe Bridge opens, the Windsor corridor is expected to see a meaningful recovery in commercial activity. Logistics operations that relocated north to Sarnia as a cost measure will evaluate the new crossings pricing and infrastructure against their current routing. Many will move back south. That movement represents jobs dispatchers, warehouse operators, customs brokers, fuel suppliers, maintenance crews, the entire ecosystem of employment that grows around a high-volume commercial crossing. And then there is the Ambassador Bridge. The Morround family's privately owned crossing is absorbing losses that its ownership structure is poorly designed to address quickly. Its toll rates are the highest in the region. Its approach infrastructure passes through urban congestion on both sides. Its physical age limits operational flexibility. American analysts have estimated losses of up to $7 million per week tied to delays in the Gordie Howe opening, losses attributable to sustained inefficiency in a corridor that a modern crossing would immediately begin to relieve. Every week the Gordie Howe Bridge remains closed is a week the market continues improvising around the infrastructure gap it was built to fill. The geography of this corridor has not changed. The economics governing how that geography is used have been completely restructured by toll differentials, tariff pressures, and a $6.4 billion bridge that is not yet open but has already redrawn the competitive map permanently. That restructuring has a cost, and right now, the people paying it are the ones driving the trucks, running the plants, and waiting for a corridor that works as efficiently as the trade it carries demands. So here is where we are. 3 bridges, 1 corridor, $3.66 billion in daily trade, moving through a region that is simultaneously navigating tariff pressure, geopolitical repositioning, and the most significant infrastructural transition it has seen in a generation. The toll economics have already shifted volume once. The political dispute has been documented, contested, and for now resolved in favor of the legal architecture that was built over a decade ago. But the real competition has not started yet. It starts the day the Gordie Howe Bridge opens. And when it does, I see 3 plausible paths forward. The first scenario, Gordie Howe dominates. It opens on schedule. Its toll structure attracts volume from both Sarnia and Windsor. And the modern freeway-to-freeway design delivers on its projected 20 INUT transit reduction. Fleets restructure around it permanently. Blue Water returns to a secondary role. The Ambassador Bridge is left serving local traffic and a shrinking share of commercial freight. A privately owned crossing with the highest tolls, the oldest infrastructure, and no structural mechanism to compete aggressively on price against 2 publicly backed rivals. The second scenario, political delay compounds into structural stagnation. The Gordie Howe Bridge is delayed a 3rd time. Bilateral tensions between Canada and the United States harden further. Blue Water consolidates its dominance not because it is the optimal crossing, but because it is the available one. The Ambassador Bridge lobbies aggressively to slow regulatory approvals and extend its window of relevance. The corridor operates below its potential efficiency for another 2 to 3 years while the politics resolve themselves. The third scenario, the corridor finds a new equilibrium. 3 bridges, 3 distinct market segments. Gordie Howe captures heavy commercial freight. Blue Water serves Northern Ontario distribution networks. The Ambassador survives on local commuter traffic, tourism, and the inertia of established relationships. Not a winner, not a loser, just a market that divided itself into three smaller pieces. Each of these outcomes carries different consequences for employment, supply chain efficiency, and the bilateral trade relationship that underpins both economies. Here is the question I want you to answer in the comments below. When infrastructure becomes a geopolitical instrument, when a bridge is no longer just a bridge, but a pressure mechanism in a bilateral negotiation, who actually absorbs the cost of that politicization? The truck driver in Windsor, the assembly line worker in Detroit, or the consumer at the end of the supply chain who never sees the corridor at all? Tell me what you think. And if this kind of analysis is what you come here for, the kind that goes beneath the headline and reads the structure underneath, subscribe and turn on notifications, because when the Gordie Howe Bridge finally opens, we will be here to break down exactly what it means in real time.